Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox and thanks for logging on. This is Watches Tonight. And the watches we have tonight are led by Vacheron Constantin. We're going to talk about Vacheron in depth with close shots of watches, movements, and beyond the Vacheron topic. We're going to go in depth to discuss movement, finish, and architecture with a little help from my friend, the macro camera. We've got Sean on the switcher, and Nick is actually sitting in to watch Sean tonight. We have Edward Ledden in the box, Arto Charles from New York City, Enrique Cassiano, Soma R, Boutique 1 from Kuwait City this time, not Poland. We got Mr. Lars from Austria. We've got Miroslav, Mark S. from Brooklyn, CLF, Sean Hansen, Jim Millett, Dealer Ignition joining in from the Great White North in Vancouver, and John S. Monday Talking Watches with Tim. Indeed, we are talking watches, Alessio, Aaron, and Keystar. So remember, Instagram is where the fun continues. I now have enough 1-minute videos that you can literally binge watch my Instagram all night long. We've got there a Patek quartz marine chronometer, an aventurine dial Lange, an Urwerk, an engraved Breguet, and a fired yellow titanium de Bethune, plus a promo for our Chris Lee interview. There is tons of stuff on Tim_Masso. Please join me on Instagram. All right, viewer wrist shots number 1, one of our previous collect conversations. Shagor H gets us started with his Moser Streamliner QP and then a Marvin the Martian watch behind. He has many. We have Ricardo M. of Ireland indulges us with a rare wrist shot of the Rolex Daytona Le Mans 100, the new Paul Newman. Haven't seen one of those in the wild until now. Omer shoots his JLC Reverso, Ferrari Roma, and a rainbow during a walk in Zurich. Joey S. and his vintage 1960s Patek Philippe 3525 impress on a period 14-carat bracelet. Mufadal G. has the all-in-one steel Patek. It's a power reserve, an annual calendar, a flyback chrono, full steel, full bracelet, and well-loomed. That is the 5961A. And we've got Richard C. of South Florida, a longtime friend, who joins us from South Florida with our Vacheron theme. And his Overseas is a wonderful segue into that. Send your wrist shots to mondaymailbag@thewatchbox.com to see your pieces on these pixels. So I noticed something the other day when I was looking at the most searched topics on Watchbox Studios and Watchbox Reviews. It turned out that a lot of people were searching for Vacheron, more than Omega, Rolex, and Patek apparently, which surprised me, to be honest. But all the same, I believe in giving the people what they want. And today we're going to talk about Vacheron. We're starting with the Overseas. And I think at the end of the day, you will find that my favorite Vacherons are the weird ones, but the Overseas is definitely the meat of the market. So let's talk about the Overseas history. Started in 1977. That is Vacheron's Factory Museum Collection 222. They made about 500 in steel, 120 in steel gold, and 100 in full gold. And that's the original 37mm jumbo from 1977. It wasn't designed by Gerald Genta. It was designed by Jorg Hysek. And its design served as the touchstone for the 1996 Overseas self-winding. This was Vacheron returning to the sports watch genre for the first time since the mid-80s. Now, the original was about 37mm in diameter. It was exceptionally thin. A couple of different dials: salmon, blue, tritium, military dial. That's one of the best. I reviewed all of them, and I have to say this is my favorite version of the Overseas automatic. We've got a Girard-Perregaux movement with a chronometer certification inside. It's the thinnest. It's still just as water resistant. The faceting of the bracelet and the intricacy of the links, by far the most expensive of the Vacheron Overseas bracelets to finish, and the fit is second to none. 1999, we saw a watch that helped to make the Overseas what it is today. The Overseas Chronograph, the original version, the 49140, was smaller than the current at 40mm. It had a Frederic Piguet movement modified with a double-digit date, and yes, again, you could get the military dial. It was a friendlier, more wearable Overseas chronograph that's still a favorite of purists. 2004, the second generation Overseas. This is the Overseas that really caught fire and for a good decade plus became the engine that drove the Juan Carlos Torres era of Vacheron. We got a chronograph, we got an automatic. In 2006, we even got the first Overseas dual time, And that watch would later give birth to the third generation's dual time, which I think might be the hidden gem in the current collection. But we're not there yet. 2009 gave us the first Overseas available with a rubber strap, which was the Deep Stream. It was also the first Overseas to mix titanium and steel into one case. And finally, 2016, we reached the present day, more or less, with the third generation watch. 2016 was a recession in the watch industry. It wasn't bad globally, but for watches, that period 2015, 16, and 17 was brutally harsh. And this watch was an all-new price point for Vacheron, as well as an all-new level of finish, manufacture movements, display casebacks, quick-release bracelets, all things that cost money. And the dirty little secret of the second generation Overseas was that part of the reason it sold so well was that Vacheron was discounting it and also, frankly, extensively wholesaling new inventory to the gray market where it would sell for even less. That was one of the reasons the second generation sold so well. The problem, by the time you took the discounted price of, say, a second generation Overseas chrono and compared it to the non-discounted price of a third generation chrono, it was almost a 2 times factor, so twice as much money. And that left a lot of previous Overseas buyers dead in their tracks, especially since it seems no one was buying watches from 2015 to 2017. So, let's relive some of the history leading up to 2016. And by the way, spoiler alert, the Overseas is doing great now. That 2016 watch was a little bit ahead of its time, but its time has come. Okay, so I have a box of tricks. And it is a box that shocks, starting out with the original Overseas self-winding. So Sean has our macro camera. The first thing I want to call out here is just how petite the watch is. 37 millimeters in diameter. It's just about 8 millimeters thick. It's the thinnest Overseas other than the short-lived 2000V reference. And you can see that it features a dial with a late appearance of sigma marks, as this a priori system designed to signify either white gold hands and indices or a solid gold dial, that was phased in the early 70s on Swiss watches at the request of a Swiss Precious Metals Trade Association. So the little sigma style signature meant you have gold on the dial, and for the indices and the hands here, indeed you do. But Vacheron was one of the very last to use that. Now this is a Luminova era dial. My favorite feature, in addition to the sigma, I guess my second favorite, would be this lovely vaulted Vacheron logo up at the top. Now you have the Maltese crossed bezel. You could see that the bracelet is incredibly intricate, not just with staggered link alignment and size and polish, but if you look down the center, you could see that there are 2 distinct channels inside of the bracelet. And then if you open up the clasp, it's got a double locking factor, both a clamshell and then this little switch that moves right and moves left. And you can see open and closed. And the way this works is you have a double lock on the clasp, because this was designed to be a real sports watch. You have the image of the Italian naval training vessel Amerigo Vespucci on the back. That's the ship. And it's 150 meters water resistant, which was unprecedented for a Vacheron at the time. Inside you have Vacheron caliber 1311, which is a Girard-Perregaux 3100 that's been adjusted by Vacheron to make chronometer spec. And this was the only Overseas that was certified as a chronometer. So if you ask me which generation of Overseas do I want this one. Okay, we're not quite done with the first generation. That's the 1996 watch. This is 1999. Now I talked about the military dials. Now you can see what it actually looks like. In comparison to the second generation chrono, the first generation features balanced registers at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, whereas the second generation featured a big eye style design for the minutes register at 3. Well loomed, no shortage here, same water resistance as the self-winding. You can see again you have the same ship on the reverse side, and then inside you have a Frederic Piguet 1185 high horology automatic. It's thin, it's fine, it's hand finished, it's 5-position adjusted, it's vertical clutch, it's column wheel, and it is very, very well suited to this watch, as it makes the watch thin in profile. Despite being automatic winding and a chrono and a double-digit date, the movement's only about 6 millimeters thick total, so that works really well. One more feature of the first generation automatic I want to show you is that the interior of the bracelet, I don't know how well you can see this, but the interior of the bracelet is mirror polished. And the time spent on this versus the visibility of the part It's absolutely seamless and it feels super slick on the wrist. It's not just glossy, it is truly mirror polished, and I can't quite show that because I can't open up the bracelet. Just know that the bracelet on that first generation is beyond belief. Okay, so now we jump to the present era. The original Overseas self-winding came out in 2016 for the third generation. We didn't get this black dial until 2 years later. Now it's 41 millimeters in diameter. Now, of course, we still have white gold hands, indices, and logo. The watch is still 150 meters, but it's got something that came out on the second generation, which is anti-magnetic protection to 25,000 ampere per meter. The third generation Overseas costs what it does because you get so much more. You get a quick release bracelet, you get 2 accessory straps and a spare clasp. The 2 accessory straps, leather and rubber. It has a manufacturer movement for the first time, which you'll note is sized to fit the case. It's also Geneva hallmark for the first time. And you can see twin barrels, a large movement that fits the case back well. We have a hand engraved, polished, bead blasted, satinated rotor. 4 different finishes on that 22 karat rotor. You could see the stripes are exceptionally luminous. I don't know how well you can see the beveling, but the beveling is to a high grade. This one earns its Geneva seal. You can also see that the Geneva seal is on the case, as since mid-2012, Geneva seal has been a full watch imprimatur of quality, not just the movement. Now, taking a look at the bracelet, it is deeply impressive. You could see that it's internally finished. There we go, to the point that the sharp inward creases of the bracelet have been mirror polished. And you'll note every single link on this bracelet is removable with a screw fixing it in position. See if we can get the focus there. See, a screw on every single link. Now what we also have on this third generation watch is a sleeved micro adjustment on each side. So you have 2 1.5 millimeter micro adjustments built in, just like that. And again, because the watch does feature a quick release system, I can pop the bracelet off and then just as easily pop it right back on. A really slick piece. It does wear larger, but you can see, although thicker, it is not thick. This is a very special watch. The lume is outstanding, and there's several different versions of the dial: silver, black, blue, and brown. So now talking about the third generation chronograph, you can see here the blue dial. This is probably broadly the most popular. It's got a lovely black polished metal base with lacquer on top that gives it the same impossibly bright sheen as a special blue chronometer also made in Geneva. This too has the quick release bracelet, but we've got something different now. We've got a chronograph movement. So the automatic is a 60-hour power reserve. The chronograph is 52. It's vertical clutch, it's column wheel, and if you look carefully, you can actually see that the column wheel has a Maltese cross as its center. Try to see that a little bit better. The rotor doesn't want to cooperate. You can see a Maltese cross at the center of the column wheel, just like that. This is a watch that lives up to its billing. It's also water resistant. It's also anti-magnetic. It is very well loomed. These are great alternatives to the Nautilus and the Royal Oak because in general, you can buy them pre-owned for a lot less. Let's say the Overseas self-winding, let's say it's $25,000. Now let's say you want to go out and you want to buy the silver or the blue or the black dial. Well, it's going to be somewhere between like 27 and 30. So 25 going to 27 to 30, knowing that your money is safe in it. You go out, you buy it, you wear it for a few years, you sell it for what you paid. Whereas with the Nautilus, if you go out and you buy a 5711 for $125,000, I can't tell you for a fact that if there's an economic downturn, 2 years from now, that won't be a $75,000 watch. Even if the Overseas winds up costing you $2,000, $3,000, let's say you can't quite get the 27 you paid for it. It's not the end of the world. What it is, though, is a better watch. Okay, jumping to something deeply special. This came out in 2020. It wasn't the first Generation 3 perpetual calendar. It's the Generation 3 perpetual calendar skeleton. That's what came out in 2020. Now, it's 41.5 millimeters, but ultra thin. And like the entire rest of the collection, it too features the quick release bracelet. So you can pop that right off, and I can show you the 1120 base. JLC origin, finished by Vacheron to Geneva hallmark, free-sprung, fully skeletonized, internally beveled, and you'll note they didn't use stripes across the bridges. They used brushing, satination. It's a different look and one that works better than Côte de Genève on a watch like this. You still get the micro adjustments inside the clasp. Every feature you saw on the bracelet of the chronograph and the self-winding you get right here. Every single link is removable. And you can see just how special this movement is, as it's been entirely nickel anthracite coated. You see interior angles, you see black polished screws, a fully skeletonized and interior beveled rotor. Very, very special, with a ring that runs all the way around and actually sits on 4 ruby roller bearings. There's a beryllium ring, there's a mass on top of it. Both of them are prevented from hitting the bridges and plates by those ruby rollers. And every once in a while, let me see if I can find it here, but sometimes when I have a skeletonized watch with this movement, I can actually show you one of the ruby rotor bearings. Indeed, I can right here. Let me see if I can show you. If you look carefully right there, you can see a ruby. That's one of the roller bearings for the winding rotor. A legendary movement. And of course, it is both a skeleton and a perpetual calendar. And surprisingly, this is a skeleton perpetual calendar that's quite visible and well loomed. All the dial side module components are handsomely executed to the point that you never really need to take this Geneva Hallmark watch off of the wrist to appreciate it. All right, let's see what's going on in the box. Thomas Burnett expressing his regret that there is no big date on the Generation 3 chronograph. And I know, I agree with you, that was a huge oversight. I mean, it was the single most charismatic part of the watch. They should have found some way to keep it, and I'm totally in agreement there. Question from Danny: do you think Rolex will ever make traditional annual perpetual calendar style watches like they used to? Well, they do make an annual calendar in the Sky Dweller. As far as perpetual calendars, I'm not sure. We'll see what they do with the Karl F. Bucherer brand now that they own it. That seems like a logical place for autologerie complications. But if Rolex ever does a perpetual calendar, it'd be very cool to see it on a reborn Dato Compax, the Jean-Claude Killy from the 50s and early 60s. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick look at some of my favorite overseas. So this is what my ideal overseas collection would look like. First, Generation 2 Perpetual Calendar Boutique Edition. Titanium, stainless steel, 150 meters water resistant, anti-magnetic, vertical clutch, column wheel, chronograph, and perpetual calendar. 80 pieces made. There's also a 20-piece US boutique limited edition made that same year that I think is even cooler. Okay, I would add a Generation 3 self-winding with the rare brown dial. Made from 2016 through early 2019, this was the least ordered variant, and this now costs almost twice what a silver dial costs used, so people have noticed. Finally, Generation 3 Ultra Thin, the 2000V. This was the only effective jumbo overseas, the one that is core collection, as close to the 222 as possible, maybe even closer to something like a 3700 than the actual 222. No date, 1120 movement, full white gold. According to what I've heard, about 100, maybe even fewer made. So this is a very collectible Vacheron, maybe one of the most collectible of the modern era. Now, my Vacheron dress watch collection, what would that look like? Well, we're starting with the American 1921, but not standard. Back in 2016, they made a 15-piece rose gold ruthenium dial limited edition for the Monticello Motor Club, basically a country club with a race course, and it was for their 10th anniversary. They're in New York. They're not all that far from me. I'd like to be a member, but I think it's probably too rich for my blood. The watch, though, I might be able to swing that. Now, the 47112, if you saw the Michael Mann theatrical adaptation of Miami Vice with Colin Farrell, that was the watch he wore. It was made in platinum or yellow gold. I actually like the look of the yellow gold for the warmth of the material, but at only 39 millimeters with a Lamagna base, this is a perpetual calendar chronograph with moon phase that has a Hunter case back. Deeply impressive stuff. A little giant, 39 millimeters, anyone can wear it. It's like 46 millimeters lug to lug, and it's got that lovely Lamagna 2320 base. As good as it gets, that would be at the top, along with my Saltarello in white gold. The Saltarello was a retrograde jump hour with a Geneva Hallmark automatic movement and a solid gold dial cut on a rose lathe. They made it in yellow and rose and white gold. And the Saltarello with caliber 1120, hand decorated with skeletonized and engraved rotor. That's the movement you just saw in the perpetual calendar. Here's the whole watch just for reference. The white gold that I prefer, they made 200 of those. Finally, the weirdest Vacheron of all time, the Sputnik. Made in 2007 to celebrate 50 years since the launch of Sputnik. I tend to dissociate this one from its political baggage. That was a great feat of human endeavor. I think Sputnik is something that will be remembered long after the government that created it. I think the scientists who put that up in space inspired a generation, and not just a generation of Russians. So they made that in white gold. They made 10 pieces in 2007, all retailed exclusively through the Moscow boutique. It is the perfect application, if we go full screen again, for satellite hours. This is in fact a star wheel, and you have a digital timescale down at the bottom just below Sputnik. It works exactly like the AP star wheel. Okay, viewer wrist shots number 2. Audemars S is back with a fall walk in Zurich in his Vacheron Constantin Overseas black dial. You saw it on my desk, now it's on your screen. Max S lights up our screen with the prototype, and this is a prototype, official Tim Masso timeout hat plus the Rolex Submariner LV. There will be more timeout gear coming from Tim Masso. We have Paul P. of Los Angeles, who sears your retina with Masso green. He's got the hat too. And Grand Seiko's Ryusendo dial on the SBGK 015. Shane A. fits the hat and a wrist shot into a single frame with his Cartier Santos large DLC bezel and of course the timeout hat. Dan R. and his IWC Pilot's Watch Chronograph Bronze pay respect to New York's leading lady. Send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at thewatchbox.com to see your pieces on my pixels. So let's talk watch finish versus quality. First, Patek Philippe, and a watch that I think is one of their coolest in recent years. If you know the 5370, you know it is a split-second chronograph with a platinum case, a loomed dial, Breguet Arabic numerals, and this is an enamel dial in Grand Faux Blue. Exceptionally difficult to do. The first one from 2015 was a black dial. This came out in 2020 after a few more years of work. Patek was able to create a glassy blue enamel of the same quality as their black and white enamel. It has a platinum case with a recessed case band. Let's see if we can get this thing to focus here. There we go. You can see that the case band is actually recessed. And then on the back we have the movement, which is exquisite. It's a forest of steel and brass. And you'll appreciate the fact that it features a separate bridge for the split-second mechanism. So you can see it grasps that split-second hand and releases. When you fire it all up, you have the ability to stop that seconds hand and then split the seconds between two events that are occurring concurrently. 65-hour power reserve, overcoil hairspring, lateral clutch chronograph, and you can see just how good all of that looks. And importantly, it features a decoupling mechanism, so when the split-second hand is stationary, it doesn't slow down the movement and cause it to drag. You can also see that the column wheel features a black polished cap, and that is Geneva style. This is not better or worse than Lange. It's a completely different school of thought and one that I adore. All right, and since we were talking Patek, I think it's also important to speak of a high grade of finish that also includes architecture, and I think few do that better than Grunefeld. Now, this Grunefeld G06 automatic base actually started life as an Andreas Streller construction, so they started with the basic train architecture, but what the Grunefelds did was they created bridges in the shape of bell gable roofing. So each bridge is designed to look like the roof of a traditional Dutch house. You can also see that each bridge is internally recessed and media blasted. There's satination around the edge of the bridge, and then the very outermost edge, if I can show you that, has been mirror beveled. Also, and this is greatly impressive, the bridges here are made of stainless steel, which is extraordinarily difficult to finish. You can also see that the Grunefelds used a descending order of size for the pivot jewels. It's automatic winding, it's a 56-hour power reserve, it is beautifully decorated, and it comes inside a Principia 1941 case. So this is the 39.5mm case. There are several different dial and hand options. This one is granular Dutch orange, and of course these are made in Oldenzaal in the Netherlands. Let's see if we can get my camera to focus on the case band. You can see how deeply sculpted and recessed these lugs are. Grunefeld case designs are among the best in the industry, and just really great looking stuff on my desk and now on your screen right here. Look at the solarization on the barrel. Everything about this is above category. Now I'm gonna check what you guys are saying right here. We got James Carrion in the box as well as Mark S. James Carrion saying, I've bought it from Chrono and it was terrifying enough. Don't need any other reason to be freaked out. Let's see, what was the question? I have to scroll back. Would anyone buy from Chrono24 if the watch private seller had no legal obligation to accept returns? No. We give you 7 days at Watchbox because if you buy something online, you should be able to return it. You haven't seen it. You haven't worn it. You've seen a photo and taken me at my word. You should be allowed to return it just because you don't like it. That's why we have that 1 week, no questions asked return policy. No returns, you may as well say go to hell. I mean, as a seller, I can't think of anything more revolting. So let's talk about watches that are anything but revolting. And we'll talk about how watches can be very simple, but also very complicated and achieve the same measure of appeal. So we're talking about Lange now, and we're going to start with a watch that has only 2 hands and a manual wind movement. And of course, surprise, this is the Lange Saxonia Thin Copper Blue. This came out in 2018. It's very simple. This watch is white gold, it has 2 hands, it has a dial of aventurine glass, and it has a manual wind movement that, while handsomely finished in characteristic Lange style, it's still very simple, very elementary. It is a 3-day power reserve, so that is one feather in its cap. All this is 39 millimeters in diameter in white gold. What I don't understand is how these sell for less pre-owned than they sell for new, but the Chronomètre Bleu, which is a whole lot less appealing to me at least, sells for multiples of its new retail price, and its retail price at this point is almost 40 grand. I would rather have this. Now, this is as simple as Lange watchmaking gets. On the other hand, we also have this right here, which came out in 2011. This is the striking time version of the Zeitwerk. You could see constant force device, Maltese cross stopworks, free sprung balance beating away at 2.5 hertz, and then on the dial side, you can see the charismatic triple jump with the strike on the quarter and the hour. And if you want to know how that strike sounds, this is watchmaking at its best. Power reserve, what appears to be part of the dial is actually part of the movement, and that right there is a little clear sapphire that is the pivot center for these 2 wheels. It's very special. And this is as good as it gets in the world of Lange. I cannot think of anything more beautiful, and that's before we even get to the freehand engraved components. This is 44 millimeters in diameter, but you truly get the feeling that every square millimeter inside the case was used up containing this movement. And then on the dial side, you could see we have those black polished strikers. Very special. And proving that Lange can also be a little quirky, here we have the Cabaret, which I have always said is a great, by the way, it's just transitioning as it rolls through midnight. I've always said this is a great buy because a lot of people don't even know this watch exists, and non-round watches suffer from some sort of prejudice if they're not Santos, Tank, or Reverso. This is a great way to get into Lange watchmaking at one of the most accessible price points. It's still a solid gold case with a sterling silver dial and a movement, though simple, that gives you a lot of what you associate with Lange watchmaking, from the style to the material to the double-digit date. So really cool on that front. Okay, jumping back into the box, Horatio saying, Tim, we were hoping to see you at watch time. I would have loved to have gone, but a COVID scare led me to isolate, unfortunately, and after that, there was only 1 day of watch time left, so I figure you guys would all be gone. We have Thor. Tim, would you say Seiko finish, Grand Seiko finish is a bit overrated when people compare their core watches? Oops, your question just jumped away from me. Hang on. Let me see what I can do here. Okay. Yeah, I would say that Grand Seiko finish is, I would call it about on par with maybe Breitling in-house calibers. I think that at the end of the day, you know when you're looking at truly great finish with Grand Seiko, it's when you're looking at a micro artist studio watch. I would say that with the new 3-day and 5-day movements, the finishing quality is higher than it was, but it's still mechanically applied. That's the key thing. With Grand Seiko, the finish is going to be mechanically applied if it's not micro artist. Marcos joining from Cypress, Texas. Thank you for joining me from the Lone Star State. Mark S. Tim, Chopard Alpine Eagle bracelet versus Overseas first generation. I will say that the Chopard Alpine Eagle bracelet has less lateral play than any bracelet I've ever experienced. I think that structurally it's better than the Vacheron bracelet, but in terms of finish, the Vacheron is still more intricate, and I think that's important to emphasize. And then Adam Smith, if you like aventurine dials, the Chapek aventurine is stunning. And then a question about whether I think Moser will be collectible. And I would say some models. Definitely the streamliners, they seem to be holding down production on those, and they seem to be going in short bursts of production where they make a watch for a year and then they discontinue it. So for example, the old Green Dragon, the new Smoked Salmon, those are probably your best bets. Okay, what else is going on? Let's take a quick look at a little old brand from L'Auberson. But before we do that, let's talk about wrist shots. Number 3, Waffle On Watches leads the line with his G-Shock Cassiope in gray. Matt C. of Brisbane hits the screen with a rare Speak Marin Ripples. And take a look at the movement. If that looks like the movement in the new Louis Vuitton Tambour, that's because they both come from Cercle des Horlogères, which is a Speak Marin company. Jens from Germany stops to refuel with his Breitling Chronomat B01 Chronograph 42 and caffeine. We got Joe C. from Indianapolis scales the heights at Zion National Park with his Glycine Airman with Hands by RGM. Chase L. delights with his THA-powered Ulysse Nardin mono pusher chronograph. A lot of folks don't realize that movement wasn't just used in Cartier and Franck Muller, it was also used by UN. Send your shots to MondayMailbag at thewatchbox.com to see your analog on my digital. Okay, watch finish, different styles and quality. Let's continue our journey with a look at fine decoration from mid-sized independents. We're going to hold off for a while on what I had planned because I want to bring in a watch that's outstanding. Dial and movement. From L'Auberson, this is from Debatoon. This is the rarely seen 40mm DB25 moon phase. Now you can see the entire movement. Let me just make sure you realize those are fingerprints. That's not on the caliber. It has been capped with steel bridges and plates and then black polished. You could see that the disc, and it is a disc for a balance wheel, solid silicone with a white gold rim, 2 barrels, 6 days of power reserve, 1, 2, 3 shock protection springs, 6 days of reserve, a dial made of black polished and fired titanium with pink sapphires on the spherical moon phase as well as the constellation of Orion. Long discontinued and very, very rarely seen. This 40mm DB25 moon phase is one of the best watches they've ever made because it has a rare compact size that's uncommon on modern Debatoon watches. Okay, now I'm going to talk about, let's talk about Ulysse Nardin. A lot of folks don't realize how much true horlogerie comes out of Ulysse Nardin, sometimes in collaboration with Christophe Claret, which is their neighbor. So I'm going to show you the Triple Jack, which is a limited edition white gold Jacquemart minute repeater, meaning it has automata on its dial, but also a repeater. Okay. Okay, so as you can see, automata on the dial side, and then on the reverse side, we have a movement that was created. Let me just pop this pin out of the strap here. We have a movement that was created as a collaboration between Ulysse Nardin and a company that existed in the late 80s and early 90s, which was a collaboration between Christophe Claret and Renaud Papy. Before Christophe Claret went off on his own and Renaud Papy became APRP, they had a joint venture that created this movement. And you can see it is classically beautiful with black polished strikers, broad striped solarization on the ratchet and crown wheel core, bevels a mile wide, and a finger-style train from the center wheel down to the escapement. Deeply impressive. This is caliber 73. A lot of folks don't think of watches like this when they think of Ulysse Nardin, and they really should. Now let me show you something else that's very special. From Girard-Perregaux. A lot of people think that if you want an ultra high-end skeleton sports watch on a bracelet, you have to go to Vacheron or AP. Fact is, you don't. 42 millimeters in steel and launched in 2017. This is the Laureato skeleton. On the dial side, I can show you endless interior angles inside of these bridges. And on the reverse, I can show you that the watch is no less fine than Bollywood Audemars Piguet references that will cost you a colossal markup on the aftermarket, or an application and years of waiting. Let me see if I can get more light in here. That's the one difficult thing. When you've got one of these watches on a bracelet, it's difficult to get the light and the focus at the same time. So you can see that rotor internally skeletonized and beveled. Deeply impressive stuff from a company that's generally not acknowledged as a source for this sort of thing. It even has a 54-hour power reserve. This is the larger caliber 1800, not the old 3300. And again, everything in here is finished to the same standard as a Royal Oak skeleton. You're just not going to pay the price of a house to own it. Okay, now I'm going to show you from Laurent Ferrier, a watch that I think is criminally underrated, but the double spiral tourbillon, and as you can see, part of the Gallet family from the beginning. Here we have a black onyx dial, a white gold case, and then on the reverse side, a case-back tourbillon, which frankly is the way I prefer mine. Now, if you look, you can see that the architecture is inspired by vintage chronometry movements that were used for chronometry trials. We have a black polished, skeletonized bridge, asymmetrically designed for the tourbillon. We have interior angles within that steel bridge. We have stripes that are a mile wide, bevels likewise, 80 hours of power reserve, and 2 horizontally opposed hairsprings. So in any physical position, one hairspring will start moving slow, the other will start moving fast. They'll cancel out the effects of gravity. This is an 80-hour power reserve with the most beautiful click I've ever seen. See right here? You can see that click is both the spring and the click itself rounded and polished to prevent the barrel from running backwards. So I thought that was pretty cool. I also thought it was neat that we have this extraordinary stainless steel Amazonia limited edition, and on the back we have yellow gold gilded micro rotor automatic. This is the FBN 229 with a double direct impulse natural escapement inspired by Breguet. There is no Swiss lever, just 2 escape wheels and a 3-day power reserve driven by a jeweled staff ratcheting rotor. Really cool stuff. Now, a brand we never talk about here on the show, but really should, Beauvais. Out of Moutier in Switzerland, it's a fully integrated manufacturer that is run like a kingdom by Pascal Raffi, a pharmaceutical executive and lawyer who's turned watch lord. He hates the word watch, so I'm going to call this a timepiece. That's his preferred name. You could see banknotes scrolling in a Florizan, hand engraved on this Amadeus 7-day tourbillon, a 39-piece limited edition. You could see the tourbillon visible from both sides. Oh yeah, it's double-sided, but it can do something that no other watch can. Take a look at this. Now, I'm removing the strap and I'm turning it into a table clock. Now it's a table clock. Right on my table, just like that, boom. It can sit on your desk. This is the Amadeo case. You push some triggers, and this is easier to do when I'm not demonstrating for the camera, but you push some triggers now, you close it back up, and it becomes a pocket watch. So it's a desk clock, a wristwatch, and a pocket watch. It has a 7-day power reserve and a power reserve indicator. It's 44 millimeters in white gold, and no, you will never see another. Beauvais makes all of this watch, the engraving, the movement, the case, the dial, everything in-house. They have no advertising and they need none. One of the most exclusive watch brands in the business. Okay, finally, we reach the end, maybe, with a watch by a man who needs no introduction. This, one of the first 10 Philippe Dufour Simplicities ever made, is a 34mm example. Now, the Simplicity was conceived after the Duality of 1996. The idea behind the original late 90s Simplicity concept was a watch designed specifically for Japanese collectors. Hence, it was very simple, and there was a preference for smaller case sizes, so they were made in 34 and 37mm sizes. This is the 34, a Metalem rose-lathe guilloche dial with Arabics and Dart-style indices. We have a welded lug case. That's how the case was constructed. And then on the reverse side, a movement that is famous for both its simplicity, but then its detail complexity. I'll do my best to catch the light here. You could see that there are devil's horns points over the center wheel. We have a click, much like what you find on the Ferrier. This is the best winding watch I've ever experienced. Nothing else compares. A free-sprung balance, which I didn't expect, a little more high-tech than I expected from Dufour. All this in a 30mm movement that is surprisingly large for its era and the size of the case. It fully fills the case back. There's a blued overcoil, and it beats away at a delicious 2.5 hertz. There is a black polished cap on the escape wheel cock. There are several sharp interior angles, and I don't know how well you can see the beveling, but it's as broad as the Grand Canyon. And those stripes, those Geneva waves, look at that. That is anything but a common stripe. You can see the only blued screws here are used to fix the rose gold nameplate to the movement. And normally that's where I would end the episode, because how do you top Philippe Dufour? Well, you do it. Guys, you're going to love this. If Philippe Dufour is a demigod, then Abraham Louis Breguet is the full-fledged thing. This is Breguet Souscription pocket watch number 1602, ordered and delivered to England for the equivalent of 51,000 modern US dollars on August 24th, 1805. If you look at the train from the barrel down to the escapement, you could see it looks exactly like the dial of La Tradition, the 7027. It features a temperature-compensated blued hairspring that automatically adjusts inside its stud holder to compensate for temperature change. It features traditional Breguet wheels. It features, if you look at the balance, it features Parachute, the first ever shock protection system. And although you can't see it on the dial side, this watch features a ruby cylinder escapement, a signature of Breguet, the ultimate development in cylinder escapements. It also features a stopworks, so it will halt itself rather than run slow. You could see that the bridges are acid frosted because they wouldn't have used a wire brush back then. The name is engraved freehand on the dial. The case band, as well as the case back, engine turned on the case band to make it easier to grip, and on the dial side, part of a rare series of watches featuring only one hand, but it's a 61mm pocket watch, so due to the size of the time scale, you can accurately read to within 5 minutes. We have engine turning, clou de Paris, and if you look carefully, you could see that the watch is both wound and set at center using this key. It's a big, slow, loud movement that's everything you would expect from a vintage Breguet. And due to the size of it, it's very legible. And I know you're going to want to hear it. I would. So listen. One of 700 souscription watches made from about 1797, 1798 to 1805, and my hands trembled when I wound it. Okay, finishing up, we've got some friends. Viewer wrist shots number 4, Michal B. of Poland watches Euro football with the Polish national team in his Zenith Day-Fi. Paul N. posts a his and hers of Omega and Longines at the Grand Theatre of Geneva, going to the opera. Christian H. of Malaysia reports from the Petronas Towers with the Petronas-sponsored Mercedes-Benz AMG F1 team. Jeff T. combines a Nissan Fairlady Z-themed citizen watch from Japan with his Nissan Ariya Electra SUV, and Mark D. takes us home from Atlantic City with his Seiko SRPD 017 and Dave Mustaine performing with Megadeth. Send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at thewatchbox.com to see your wrist on my list. Thanks to everyone. Nick and Sean, you make the best job in watches possible. Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.